to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Anne Marie Bennett. Anne Marie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. And I would love for you to start with how did you get into writing?
Yes. I love that you asked this at the beginning. And I've listened to so many, and everybody's answers are so different. I really enjoy hearing authors' answers. I was brought up in a household where we were all readers. Like I was read to from the time I was very little. So my imagination was always going.
Mhm.
And then in sixth grade, Mr. Ballantyne, I mean, never underestimate the power that a teacher has in a child's life. He assigned the English class, to write a short story. And I went home and wrote a 40-page novel, handwritten. My dad put illustrations in because he was a good artist. And we bound it. I don't remember how we bound it. A friend of mine made a beautiful full color cover. And my teacher was, I mean, everybody else was turning in like 2 pages, and my teacher was so impressed. Well, actually, I'll back up. It was about an underground cat colony and a little girl that discovered this cat colony because I'd always loved cats. And my teacher, Mr. Ballantyne, was so impressed that he sent it to a publisher. I don't know how he knew a publisher, but that, I mean, nothing ever happened with it, but just the fact that he thought that I could be published just like flipped something in my brain, I guess. And ever after that, I wanted to be a writer.
I
And then,
love
you
that.
get to college, I mean, you get to high school and you're kind of like, well, can you make a living at that? Probably not. So I was almost going to major in English. And then I met a playwright who was writing plays for the college that was nearby. And that I was all excited about his play, and I was giving him feedback on his play. And he asked me what I was going to major in because I was a junior thinking about it. And I said, English. And he said, you want to be a writer? Don't major in English. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then, so I majored in elementary education, which is my other great passion, working with kids. So that's what my degree was in. So I mean, I've always written, essays, personal essays, as well as making up stuff. When I taught second grade, I wrote stories for the kids. Like every time it was one of their birthdays, I'd write a story featuring them, and then we'd mimeograph it. Remember those days when we had the mimeographs? We'd mimeograph it out so everybody had a copy. Anyway, writing is just always, it's been a thread all through my life.
I love that so much. Okay, so many things are speaking to me right now. One, I love the fact that you leverage the passion of writing with little ones, and that's just and showing the creativity like for their birthday or something like that. That's just so cool because your passion comes through, they get excited, they
Right,
get curious and want to follow that thread.
right.
And that's just such a beautiful expression and such a sweet gift. But also the fact that, to your point about being a teacher, so you were a teacher who helped children see what was possible for them, but a teacher did that for you. And
Right.
I just loved how you passed that forward too. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that's so true. I'll never forget Mr. Valentine. And I wrote those kinds of stories featuring the kids for my nieces and nephews. I have four, from the time they were like 5 or 6 up until, I don't know, middle school or high school. And they tell me they still have them and they still remember them. That really moves me. So that was in those years. I mean, I'm 66 now. So in those years, in my 20s and early 30s, I was still making up stuff. That's what I call it.
Yeah, but that's
Making up stuff,
it,
fiction.
yeah, but that's really cool because I mean, your curiosity, you're using your imagination, which means that you're figuring out new things and that's growing too. So
Right.
that is so cool.
Yeah, 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 it was.
So then you did the education background and you taught, but how did that transition to the books that you're writing today?
Well, I've written a lot of stuff, a lot of different genres. Um, I guess, I had a life, and I was an educational consultant for a educational software company for several years, and then I met my husband, and I stopped that job. And he had 3 kids from his first marriage, and so I was helping to raise them. It was a step family thing, and I had some odd jobs, and I worked 10 years as a customer service box office assistant manager in a regional music theater near here. That was this very special job where I got to really be immersed in creative community, even though I was in the box office. But I was writing newsletters for our staff. I There were never newsletters before I got there, but um, I guess I the fiction line, the thread of like making stuff up, got lost somewhere in there. And then in 2001 and in 2011, I was diagnosed with 2 different kinds of cancer, and so went through all the treatments and surgeries. And so when I was recovering towards the end of 2012 from the second one, it was kind of, the first one was a wake up call, but then I kind of, got forgot. And then the second one was like, what is it that I really want to do, And at the top of the list, there were some things and I made them happen. But the other thing, the biggest thing was I want to write fiction. I don't I don't even care if anybody ever sees it. Get I get kind of high when I sit down and make stuff up. And a natural high, right? I should clarify. And so I started a practice in 2013 where 2 or 3, maybe 4 if I was lucky, because I was working full time at the time, and we had, the step family and the kids, and I would go into what was the guest room and shut the door and just sit down at my laptop and make stuff up. That's what I called it, making stuff up. Like one day I'd just be writing about Sarah and her cat, and then the next day maybe I'd be writing about, I don't know, John Smith, whose grandmother died. I don't know, just sit down, whatever came up. Like if something touched me that day, I might start with that, but I was writing fiction and it felt so good. And I still have so many of those starters that I call them starters because it was fun. And then in 2014, I started one of those, let's just make something up. And then the next time I sat down, I was like, oh, I'm just going to keep writing about them. And then I just kept writing about them, and it turned into Dragonflies at Night, which was what I published in 2020. So I mean, it took me like 6 years because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just making it up. And then after, like 50 or 100 pages, I was like, this is really something. So I'm going to finish it. But then I didn't know how to go or what to do or how to finish it. And I ended up taking Jennifer Loudon. I don't know if you know her work. I took her, she had this wonderful online class, and it was all about the people in the class we all weren't writing, but we could decide what the scary thing was that we weren't doing that we wanted to do. And mine was that. And she had all these, she's such a wonderful teacher, and it really inspired me to finish it. And one of the things was, you know, making a commitment, like 3 times a week for an hour and even half an hour, because she was very keen on this small steps. Like you can get a lot done in little pieces, which is how I wrote everything I've written since then. Class really compelled me to finish that book, to really finish it. But it was another like 3 or 4 years before I did it, because it took a long time. And then that was such a positive experience that I already had another idea for another one. And so at the beginning of last year, I took a couple of classes online with Jessica Brody, and she's written the Save the Cat Writes a Novel book, and she has online classes based on that. So I read the book several times and I took her classes, and I understood much more than what I did when I was writing Dragonflies at Night. So Feathers in the Sand, I set, she kind of similar to Jennifer Loudon, make a commitment. You're going to write that first draft in 3 months, 4 months, whatever. Give yourself the time. and make the commitment, and then I also take this little desk calendar with the little white squares, and every time I sit and do some work on it, I write down afterwards, 1 hour, 1.5, 2, and I have that. I can keep it up on my wall so I can see the hours adding up, and that's how the new book, Feathers in the Sand, came to be. And I wrote the first draft in 3 months, and then I set it aside because that's the next step, is to step away from it and don't look at it for a few weeks. So, and then I had beta readers from the last book who helped me, read it and gave me lots of info. I think I had too many beta readers. Someone suggested to me afterwards that I was so confused that I had like 3 weeks where I couldn't do anything because I had 12 people with all different ideas about, and I was so confused. And um, I can't remember who it was, but another published author who suggested that next time I need beta readers, that maybe I should have 3 or 4. So I think, the writing community, I'm part of Women's Fiction Writers Association, and the community and support I've gotten when I have a question is just invaluable. So I don't know if I've gone off track there, but
Well, there's a few things that I'm picking up on. So one of which is that you talked about really is about community. So building community and having that support structure to help with, the encouragement, the keeping it going, to hone the craft, to get the feedback and also the right kind of feedback because, you know, it's not just about having 3 or 4 beta readers. It's having the right type of beta readers, the readers that are really interested in this type, in this genre. So that's what they're reading. So they're going to be able to tease out different things and give feedback that you can work with, and also getting specific of what you'd like from that beta reader versus saying, just tell me what you think. Well, that's great. But if you can get more specific with questions of, how
yeah,
did this read? Or did you feel confused? Things like that. You might get a little bit more information to really be able to work with it.
right,
So it sounds to
right,
me like, to your point where you said earlier, I wasn't sure where to go, what the next steps were, but it sometimes we don't always know that next step. But your point about writing and pausing is so on point
yeah,
because you have to give yourself space. You have to give yourself time. I mean, when I work with my clients for editing projects, I tell them that too. I'm like, when it's with me, it's okay because you need to do something else.
right,
You need to do something for you or work on something else because this book is still going to be noodling around in your head.
yep,
Things are going to come
that's
through,
right, it
but
is,
it's not necessarily for you to be actively sitting there working on it. It's for you to release it and to do something else that will help you so that when you do get it back to work on those edits, you have a fresh set of eyes going back to it too. You're more excited about it as
right.
well.
Right, right. And I found that every time I took a break like that, when I gave it to the beta readers, and I just, you'll see on my calendar, there's 3 weeks of white squares. And it felt really good, but you're right, it's still noodling around in the back of my mind. I'm still thinking about those characters.
No, well, I love the fact that you use the calendar too to keep yourself motivated to saying, I want to write down so many hours. And I was actually wondering if you were writing down the number of words you wrote too, because sometimes I've seen writers go, I just need to write 2,000 words, or I just need to, sprint through so many just to try to make sure I've gotten them, even
Right.
if they're not perfect, but I'm getting it done. So I think it's cool that you wrote down the duration that you wrote versus necessarily, how many words did you accomplish? Because both are showing progress in just
Right.
different ways.
Yeah, part of one of the Jessica Brody classes I took, I think the fast drafting class that she taught, part of what she gave us was a little Excel spreadsheet where you put how many words you wanted as a goal, and then every day you put how many. And I use Scrivener, so it's easy to see how many you did. And so that was one way I was keeping track of that online. It's all very motivating for me. I kind of feel like I did Dragonflies as a pantser, they say. And then this book was more plotted, but I left room for intuition. I left room for stuff to happen while I was writing, which did, but didn't change too much the trajectory. But still, like, I didn't, when I started it, Feathers in the Sand, I didn't quite know how it was all going to resolve. I knew what the last scene was, but I wasn't sure how from like two-thirds on they were going to get to that point. But as I was writing, I just decided to trust myself and start anyway without knowing exactly. And so yeah, it's an intuitive thing, I feel, for me when I sit down and just start. Like we were talking about before you recorded, that Mark Nepo, I read something he wrote once where he said, I push the pen until it pulls me. And I kind of feel that even though I'm not writing by hand, I sit down at the laptop and start my fingers going until my mind takes over.
I think that's really cool. So, to your point, you mentioned that you plotted a little bit for Feathers in the Sand. How did you go about that? Like, did you literally sit and say, this is what I want to see these high level things? So basically just kind of touch points, or did you break it down more by chapter until you got to a point where you felt like this is enough for me to get moving and then I'll work through the rest? Like, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Jessica Brody's teaching revolves around the 15 beats, which goes through the arc. I had this, the big sticky note paper, the big easel size. I had that, on my closet doors in my writing space. So I had 4 huge sheets of that. Actually, I had 6. And I just kind of would, mark act 1, act 2, act 3. And as ideas came, I would kind of put them up there until, I mean, it took a couple months to do all of that before I actually sat down and started. So, yeah. And then I broke it down by chapter, like what would happen, what should happen in each chapter. And things got moved around at the end. And one of the things that I learned about the drafting is to keep going and not to go back and revise anything. Keep I did it on notebook paper. Some people do it online. Like if all of a sudden in chapter 4 so and so's character name has to change, you don't stop and go back and change them all. You make a note to yourself that you're going to do that after. Jessica, I remember her saying many times, future you can handle that. Right now, you're writing the story. I remember her saying that writing the first draft is the draft where you tell yourself the story. And then after that, you can go back and read it and shape it. So, and that was just really helpful to me to just keep going. Like I could write this in 3 months. It took me 5 years to write the first draft of the other one. I didn't want to do that again. So that was really, really helpful for me as far as writing this book.
That's really cool. So, I mean, and I'm a big believer too in continuing to keep going, get the draft written, and it, and not to judge it because you're allowing it to keep flowing. You know if you need more, and if something's hitting like I really feel like I need to flesh out this scene more, or I need to put more of the setting in, fine, make a note, keep moving,
Uh,
because you'll be going back through it multiple times even before you move it to a phase of working with an editor or what have you, because or beta readers, because you're going to keep working a little bit more so
yeah,
with that. So
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious of your perspective on, when did you decide that it was okay to send it to your beta readers? How did you know that you had reached that point of saying, "Okay, I've gotten it where I want it, as great as I can get it." How did you know you were there?
I think, both times with both of those novels, it was an intuitive thing. Like I'm just a very intuitive person and I always have been. And I just sensed that I was at a place where I couldn't do any more. I was on like the 7th draft, I think. And I was like, I think I have to have other eyes on it now, and that's when I reached out to, um, I have a pretty wide newsletter, mailing list. I think for me, it's a couple thousand people, which is pretty good for me. I have, I have a following at Kaleidosol, which is the business that I have online where we teach and practice soul collage. And some of those people have come to my mailing list, but not all of them read fiction. But I do offers at book sweeps. I don't know if you've heard of that or if people listening, it's a great way to add people to your mailing list. You give away a couple copies of your book, but I mean, I get several hundred people adding themselves to my mailing list every time. And some, like 10 to 15% of them then drop off when they don't get the book. But that's okay because it's built my email list, and now my super fans, which is what I call the people who are going to help me get it out there, uh, or who have helped me get it out there, I should say, um, are made up of a good mixture, half and half, people I don't even know and people I know through the Kaleidosol. So, um, yeah, and several of them helped me with it. The last book, Dragonflies at Night, and this one, um, yeah. So they were very helpful, but it was too many people. I see that now. I
So
got too over eager. I just put a note out. Who wants to be my beta reader for this from my author email list? And I got a lot of people wanting to help. and and so next time, as suggested to me by a more experienced author, I will look back at the ones who really, really had the best, most helpful suggestions for this book and just invite them personally instead of putting out a big, who wants to help me?
but in the same breath, you did something. You took action. You were
Right,
seeing it through. You were
right,
learning just like you did with the writing process, just like you did with building the manuscript and getting it moving.
right.
Something you've said that I love this, that you've cultivated a community. And
Mhm.
in doing so, however long it took to build a list, but still, that's really wonderful to have built a community, because it also sounds like what's happening is that it's not a one-way talk. A community meaning conversation, that the people in your world want to talk with you and you're talking with them. So do you
Mhm.
have any tips for authors or writers as they are wanting to create super fans or create, a community where they're really having engaged people who really want to hear from them and they want to talk to? Do you have some tips?
Well, I've built my email list, or I'm still building my email list mostly through book sweeps because I only put my book in the ones about women's fiction. And so it draws people. But I do send a monthly newsletter where I don't just push my books. I tell them something about my writing or the writing process, and I give away two paperback books every month. Not Sometimes I give away mine, but my tagline at annemariebennett.com is writing stories that stir heart and soul. So I look at books that have stirred my heart and soul, and I give two away, and I write a little blurb about why. So when I invite them to enter the giveaway, I have a Google Doc, a Google form with just like 3 or 4 questions besides their name and where they're from. And, sometimes I ask, if you could write a story, what would it be? I'm trying to remember what else I ask. I ask a personal kind of question every time. I get like anywhere from 50 to 70 people entering that and telling me things about themselves. And at one time I asked, what questions do you have about the writing process? I got tons of questions. So now I have tons of ideas for future newsletters. So
Yeah.
when a book comes out, then I have hopefully more engaged readers. So
I love that. Those were such wonderful tips. I mean, especially with just simply asking a question, what would you like more of? Or
right,
what questions do you have for me? And seeing what comes back. I do that myself because I, I've, I genuinely want the conversation.
right,
I don't want it to ever feel like it's a one-way talk. So absolutely. I think that
right.
that's wonderful. I think that's really cool.
Well, I'll add one more thing that I did at the very beginning before Dragonflies at Night when I was reading about how to market your books online. And one thing was building your email list was primo important. It was the best way to sell your books, but not to just sell your books, but to engage the readers and so forth. And I went online to many authors that I admire in in my genre, and I signed up for their newsletters. And I started getting them, and I read them all, and I deleted the ones that were boring and plain. And you know what I mean? Like there are some that all they're doing is selling you their books every time, every time, every time. And I didn't want to write a newsletter like that. I've written newsletters like like I told you, I was writing newsletters at the theater for the box office staff, and for my Kaleidosol Soul Collage work, I write newsletters all the time. So I'm like colorful. I wanted images and so I didn't copy what some authors were doing, but I saw which ones drew me and I kind of emulated them, I guess. I didn't copy them, but I'm really drawn to this one because she uses a lot of color. And I'm really drawn to this one because she's talking about her personal life. She's sharing recipes. Oh, wow, that's cool. And this one's giving away something every month. Oh, that's interesting. So that's a good suggestion, I think. Whatever field you're writing in, find authors, go to authors' websites and sign up for all their newsletters. And you'll get a lot of email for a while, but you'll be able to sift through and see which ones resonate with you and give you ideas about what to post.
I love that. I think that that's smart because to your point, you're not copying. What you're doing is you're seeing what's resonating and why is it resonating with me? Even when you look at other emails that you get, why are you opening them?
Right.
What is it about that email that makes you want to open it? Is it the subject line alone?
Yeah.
Maybe. Is it
Right.
what
Right.
else is happening? So I love that you took the time to study that and to see what resonated for you, but then make it your own.
Yeah. Yeah. The subject line's really important also. Right. Because sometimes the subject lines that I'm getting in the mail are just like, buy my book, buy my book. And I don't, what is your book about? Like, why would I want to read it? Right. So unless it's an author I know and follow. But
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think that that is so cool. Now, when you are taking the time to write the emails like you're talking about, do you batch them or do you like write when you are like do you make it a point to sit down every week and say I'm writing this for this month or is it I write so many months in advance so that I just batch so much? I'm just curious of your process.
yeah, I can't really do them that far ahead. I kind of like, I usually do them a couple weeks ahead. I send them out on the second Tuesday. So usually at the end of the previous month, I start thinking about it. It's on my list. I have lots of lists. I love the list making. My mom taught me that. Yeah, yeah. So it's sort of around the end of a month, I'll start thinking about what needs to happen for that next newsletter. What am I going to write about? I have a folder full of, ideas I've gathered from online, from other authors and so forth. And now I have lots and lots of juicy things to write about from Feathers in the Sand about Maine and Mothers and Daughters and the Gilmore Girls. And yeah, so I've got lots and lots that I can write about now. And probably the hardest thing about writing the newsletters is the subject line, making it so people will want to open it.
Yeah, but I love that. I love that how you just described like collecting those and having those topics so that you kind of have an idea and almost sounds like even taking your book and mind mapping it or doodling out what things resonate with you about this that you can talk about so that you can share it
Yeah,
in some way and that's information you can repurpose in social in the newsletter or however you need to because you know all of that came into play to help create the book too. So I
right.
love that.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
Anne Marie, this has been so awesome. Thank you so, so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
How can people connect with you and where can they get the books?
Well, I'm on line at annemariebennett.com. And so it's ANNE, don't forget the E, MARIE, and BENNETT.com. And you can get the books on Amazon. You can get it's Feathers in the Sand. That's the newest one. It's the first book in the Sea Haven Sunrise series. And it's on Amazon, but it's also on Barnes and Noble. It's on Kobo, Google Play, Apple, and most everywhere you can get digital books as well as paperback. I'm on Instagram at Anne Marie Bennett 520, and my author page on Facebook is Anne Marie Bennett Author.
Awesome. Anne Marie, this has been lovely. Thank you so, so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's been great to meet you finally.
You too.
Thanks.